Hey, this is George. Have you ever heard of Anchor.fm? It's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. Number one, it's free. Number two, there are creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so you can hear it on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Check out Anchor.fm on the iOS and Android systems.
Need psychotherapy online or in person? Check out tinyurl.com/THT psychotherapy. The George Brassey podcast is made possible with funding provided from Brassey Global Strategies, LLC, a leading political consulting, public policy, government affairs, and research firm. Are you interested in running for elected office? Need advice? Call or email George, 708-769-5015. Brassey Global Strategies 1@gmail.com.
Snowstorm forces Chicago Heights to close City Hall. Snowstorm forces Chicago Heights to close City Hall, Chicago Heights, Illinois. Snow was on everybody's mind at Wednesday night's Chicago Heights City Council meeting. The Chicago area was hit by a major snowstorm, and Chicago Heights had about 10 inches of snow dumped on it Tuesday and Wednesday. City Hall was closed Wednesday afternoon because of the winter storm, and garbage pickup on Wednesday and Thursday was also postponed. And students at Chicago Heights School District 163 went to remote learning Wednesday because of the storm. The mayor's chief of staff, Karen Zaranti, thanked city workers for their efforts. She told the council that city workers had been working round the clock to keep city streets open and safe, and would continue to do so throughout the duration of the storm. Fifth Ward Alderman George Brassey also lauded city workers, saying, "The snowstorm we have experienced in recent days has been terrible, but the City of Chicago Heights Public Works Department has done an excellent job in maintaining the roads during the snowstorm. Each and every resident's request that was submitted to my office was addressed in a quick and efficient fashion." Christopher Bykoskas, 4th Ward Alderman, added that Public Works is working diligently, doing a great job cleaning up the streets. In other business, Zaranti said that the city would be hosting its second Illinois Department of Public Health clinic offering vaccinations and booster shots 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. Saturday, February 12 at City Hall. The council also approved an ordinance renewing the city's employee health insurance policy and premium. The city expects to see premiums remain roughly the same. The city's benefits and insurance consultant told the council that he was able to negotiate lower rates with its insurer, Blue Cross/Blue Shield PPO, despite higher prescription drug usage by the 231 employees covered under the policy. Snowstorm forces Chicago Heights to close City Hall.
Before we get to the interview, I just want to tell you about our newest sponsor, Union Signs and Printing. Union Signs and Printing is a union sign shop located near Chicago, Illinois, that specializes in the production of corrugated plastic lawn signs used in applications ranging from political and election usages to unions, schools, and businesses. They also produce a vast array of other products, including American-made, union-printed t-shirts, banners, bio cards, literature, door hangers, business cards, and trifold. Get a hold of Union Signs and Printing at 815-740-1688 or find them on the internet at unionsignsandprinting.com. And don't forget to tell them you heard about their services on the George Brassey podcast.
Okay.
If you've ever been to a Chicago Heights City Council meeting or a meeting of the Board of Trustees of Prairie State College or the meeting of the trustees of Bloom Township, you've probably heard our guest Chuck Dieringer speak. Chuck is a very interesting guy, but I don't think there's ever been an interview with him where we've gone pretty in depth on some of the issues that he's interested in. So Chuck, welcome to my podcast.
Oh, thank you, George. Looking forward to it.
Chuck, before we get into the issues that you're really interested in, I want to know a little bit about your personal history.
Okay.
Did you grow up in Chicago Heights? And what's your journey so far in Chicago Heights as a resident?
I arrived here in 1972, coming from Morris, Illinois, where I had been a school business manager for the previous couple of years. I became a school business manager at the special ed school in Chicago Heights, which was the first one they ever had. They had been involved in flooding, so I was also hired for that activity because I had the unique credentials of being a stormwater engineer.
Chuck, so did you grow up in Morris, Illinois?
No, I grew up in the headwaters of the Des Plaines River in Wadsworth, Illinois.
And what besides the job, what were your initial impressions of the city of Chicago Heights in 1952?
Well, I was pretty much aware of flooding and environmental issues because I came for the speed school, which had been knocked out for 2 years until we rebuilt it. So my first 6 months, I drove over from Morris looking for the highest place in town. And that's up here on Serena Hills. And I figured that's the last place will flood. So that's how I ended up getting my house up here in North End.
So flooding is an issue that we still are confronting on the city council. It's been an issue since the 1970s.
Absolutely. If not before that.
If not before that. What do you think the fundamental issue is that causes flooding in the city of Chicago Heights?
Typically, the main problem is sewer backup, and the Thorn Creek Basin Sanitary District cannot discharge into the little Thorn Creek during its rampage. When it gets so high, it prevents them from discharging. And so they certainly have not had capacity and have had to discharge raw sewage down Thorn Creek as well. But that affects people downstream, not us. But the biggest problem is log jams and debris getting involved. And I've worked for several years with a volunteer group to help keep Thorn Creek open. It was coordinated by Max Solomon out of Glenwood. And we had the managers group fund us. We got $1 for every tire we pull out of the creek, that kind of thing. But it was lunch money. That's what funding was.
Chuck, the Thorn Creek Sanitary District, can you tell the audience a little bit about what that unit of government is and what it does?
Sure. It's a multi-purpose district that processes industrial and residential sewage waste. It's a miniature of the MWRD, which is where I've retired from, the world's largest sanitary district. I never worked for Thorn Creek, but I go to their board meetings frequently. And it's somewhat unique because it's strictly in the Thorn Creek watershed. So it's a watershed-based unit of government, which is pretty impressive based upon what we're going to talk about, hopefully, a little later.
And are the board members, are they elected? Are they appointed?
They're appointed.
And who appoints them?
Our state representatives in the legislature.
Okay. So, and what towns make up the Thorn Creek Sanitary District?
The ones that have served are mainly for Chicago Heights, Homewood, and then upstream as far as Crete and Park Forest is over to the west, but that's the main communities. Plus, there's a lot of unincorporated areas in that particular part of the watershed. I have a little hiccup, so excuse that.
Chuck, tell the audience a little bit about the Metropolitan Water Reclamation District and your career there.
Well, okay. It actually, before I do that, I need to tell a little bit about my background and how I ended up being there, because I got my doctorate in education from Northern Illinois University after couple of years of pretty hard, intensive research on my dissertation, which was about township school government, specifically in Cook County, and how the first superintendent of school was actually the township treasurer. He hired and maintained all the schools, where we now have 20 some school districts being served by the township school treasurer, but now he only handles their money. But anyway, that was my research. And I had to do a survey, having worked in this system through the speed school and also in Morris in a different version of it, because it had been abolished everywhere else in the state by Anthony Scariano when he was in the legislature, except for in Cook County, which is still survives and is still doing a pretty good job. But anyway, that's what my background was as far as getting involved in government. But MWRD comes back historically. When I was younger, my dad was a chemist. Actually, I was born, he was a chemist working at U.S. Steel during World War II. And so he didn't go into the Army. And as a result of his being in a critical occupation, making steel for the war effort. And then later in life, he became a manager for a very large farm up in the Des Moines River watershed up in Wadsworth state lines, over 600 acres, which is where pretty much I grew up. I went to a one-room schoolhouse, and I had 8 grades, 1 teacher. And I rode my bike about 3 miles to school. This was before we had school buses. So it was gravel roads, ride your bike to school, or your horse. I rode my horse occasionally too to school. But, you have to learn how to persevere in these difficult things. And that was a pretty challenging life. I was probably driving at age 5 or 6 in the fields during harvest. I'd be out there pulling the hay wagons, and they were picking up the hay as the storms were coming. So you learn some of these skills that we learned out several years later. But it was an exciting time for me. Then we moved into Wadsworth after the mill shut down. We had a mill for the township as well on our farm. My dad managed the farm and the mill, and it was shut down eventually. I don't recall why, but we moved into Wadsworth, where I lived there for several years. Went to high school also in a one-lane school district, but I went on to high school at Warren High School, which was, I was interested in a lot of different activities, including mechanics, but they only had farm agricultural equipment. So I didn't get too much mechanics other than my own self-learning, self-taught things. I had my first car in my driveway probably at 13 years old. And so I rebuilt it a few times, but by the time I was able to drive it legally, out off the driveway. But I rebuilt engines and did all kinds of stuff like that as a hobby, but that's also a way to learn by your mistakes. And I didn't have Google and YouTube to help me do it right, so you do learn when you make a mistake. Anyway, going on briefly, I just want to explain how the challenges we have back then. I think kids need more challenges like that, because I was also involved in Cub Scouts, Boy Scouts, and Explorers, and my dad was a volunteer fireman in Newport Township Fire Department. So with all these kinds of community efforts really go together to help build stature and ability, at least in my opinion.
How did those efforts end up leading you to the MWRD?
Well, that's sort of interesting. My last year in high school, my dad got transferred as he went back working as a chemist, and he got a job with MWRD and the Streamwood plant as their chemist. And so we moved down to Elgin, and my final year was Elgin High School. We had played them. Warren and Elgin played each other in those 2 years in the super sectional. So I knew the school, and I was sitting on a different side during the basketball turn. But anyway, that's how I got somewhat involved. At least I knew about MWRD. I'd been involved in their plants, but it came about after several years after I got my doctorate in education and I was not a tenured teacher. That's like a license to create jobs, because it's very difficult to find jobs with those skills. They won't hire you at that level. So when I first became a school business manager, which is my professional credential, I was in Morris, Illinois. I did two school districts, combined their business functions and showed them how to operate more efficiently. And then I came to over here at Chicago Heights. Eventually, these are all short-term development jobs, and I'd be there for a couple of years or more, develop what I'm doing. And I did a blind ad to the Museum of Science and Industry, and I became a business manager there as well, assistant business manager, did affirmative action program. So I'm pretty much a jack of all trades with the kind of skills and background that I have. My undergraduate degrees are in business. And eventually, MWRD, I have to take a civil service exam. I was on the waiting list for 2 years, and I finally got hired. And they had a minimum number of 3 candidates you had to go and interview and compete with. And I came in at a pretty high level as an engineering technician. I don't think they hire normally at the level that I was able to go, because I had background in building roads with IDOT and those kinds of things, because I'd gone to Bradley initially, and then Vietnam. Of course, Vietnam gave me a lot of stimulation in terms of education, and I made the dean's list. So I actually continued in college all this time for the next 10 years, which broadened my ability and my educational powers as far as dealing with problems. Anyway, I hope I covered it. I know I rambled on a little bit.
Chuck, tell the audience a little bit about your time as an elected official as a Bloom Township Highway Commissioner.
Okay, that was pretty challenging. When I got elected, the highway supervisor of the township was an indicted felon, and my hiccups are showing up there. And I got elected because I wanted to hire veterans and use that job to train people. And people bought that idea. And when I got that in there, I knew what the highway commissioner generally did, but I didn't know what powers he had. And of course, the previous highway commissioner probably didn't take the training that I did, because there is an opportunity to go to school for a couple of weeks and get certified and learn more about the job. He's more powerful than any other township official, and he's king of his serfdom, so to speak. He has to follow the laws, of course, but the supervisor can't tell him what to do or how to run a shop or who to hire. It's all up to him. Well, that wasn't the way things were done in Bloom Township. So right off the bat, I said, I promised to hire veterans, get them jobs, help get government should not necessarily be a starting point. It could be a starting point to a future career. And so when it came time to give them some tuition to go to Perry State College and develop their skills, the trustees said, well, we don't think you should do that. Well, I had to take half my salary, and I committed to doing that because I made a promise to the people that I do that. And so all the people that worked for me in the highway department at that time were veterans.
Chuck, you're a very passionate person about nature and the Thorn Creek area. I love riding my bicycle in the Thorn Creek Trail throughout the city of Chicago and throughout really our whole region.
Yes.
It's actually a key natural anchor, in my opinion. I believe the city should build around it and make it the infrastructure near it easier to get on to walking or on bike. That's something that I advocate on a regular basis on the city council. I know that you are a strong advocate for the Thorn Creek. Tell the audience a little bit about your environmental club.
Well, I'll do that, but I also want to tell you about what I did to help get that trail, which has never really been complete. There should be a segment of it going by the Ford plant over to Dyer. That's still available right away. And I'm trying to get our president commission to get a grant to put that in. So you go directly over to Dyer as opposed to down through Glenwood and around. And that was the Ford plant at the time, they were going to give their employees bikes to ride to work. Now, I'm talking about 19, back then when I was highway commissioner. So anyway, go on. Give me your question again, because that was just a thought I wanted to bring out. There's still some more things that can be done on our bike trails to, like you mentioned, make them friendlier and easier to use.
There's a million things we can do to improve bicycle and pedestrian safety in the city of Chicago Heights, and that's one of my issues I'm very passionate about on the city council. But I wanted you to share to the audience a little bit about what the Environmental Club of Thorn Creek does.
Okay. Well, we're sort of an outgrowth of what we did as volunteers. We have, my grandson is in 7th grade. He created our webpage, which is at Thorn Creek Environmentalclub.com, but it's EC as in Environmental Club to make it easier for people to type it. And we do canoeing and kayaking, and we're involved in reporting log jams. We get most of that from either with the use of a drone or from the bike trails and walking in. But we're mainly interested in canoeing, and actually kayaking is better nowadays. We didn't have canoes, although in October I was out to Glenwood in 2 canoes. That was one of my birthday wishes, and I got 3 grandsons, so 2 canoes we went through from Chicago Heights to Glenwood, and it was a 4-hour trip that was pretty tough, but took pictures all the way. And as a result, we get some of the trees taken out and get this stream working properly so that it will drain the floodwater. Well, they may be back in, because every time it rains, the forest preserve, 90% of Thorn Creek is in the Cook County Forest Preserve, and they do not maintain the trees that fall, that get in the creek. They don't chain them up. So when it rains, they get a floodplain, and you can see on this mapping system that I'm involved with, you can see where the floodplains are. They just go over there and cause these tremendous log jams, and then we end up with sewage and water in our basements. But that's what Thorn Creek is all about. It's a very major part of our infrastructure here.
Chuck, what are 2 books that you would recommend to the audience that are important to you as a person?
That's interesting, because one of the most important, impressive people I met was the gentleman that created the Clean Water Act, Dr. Jack Schaefer. And I got to know him personally, and I have put a copy of one of his fun books for kids to learn about watersheds. And it's called The Water Factory. And I put a copy of that book in each of the libraries in our watershed. Now, I think it's probably disappeared. That was 10, 15 years ago, but I have an original copy autographed by him. He died a couple of years ago, but it was very actively involved in creating reusable water projects, one of which is out by DeKalb, where the actual water ends up going out to the fields of fertilizing the corn. I mean, it's just, he was doing some unbelievable things. And we can still do those things today. It's been done in the desert and other parts in the country where sewage waste is reprocessed naturally. And it's really neat stuff. But that's the first book. Now, the second one is pretty difficult. I mean, I know Chicago Heights has a considerable history with interesting people in government. And of course, Mr. Grossi was the supervisor. And then Chuck Pictonici, he was the mayor when I moved here. And he and water commissioner, they all went to prison. And Chuck Panici wrote a book. I'm not recommending it, but I'm going to get it this afternoon. I found it in the Holman Library. It's called From Hero, Hero, to Zero. And that's sort of what happened to him. But he wrote that while he was in prison. I actually would recommend, if people want to learn more about township government and school government, that they look at my dissertation. It's at NIU. It took my wife 2-3 years of typing. Actually wore out the keys on this Smith Corona typewriter, which I took the keys off and rearranged into a Dvorak keyboard. But anyway, this is before computers when we were doing my dissertation. She had to type all this stuff. But of course, she was a court reporter, and she knew how to type pretty good. I'm a better typist than she is now because I use a modern method of typing, but that's another topic.
Chuck,
Anyway, yeah, go ahead.
where can the audience find you on the internet if they wanted to connect with you or the Environmental Club?
Well, you could just do a search on my name, and the spelling of the name is somewhat unique, although there's a lot of Dieringers. It's like the word die, D-I-E, and ringer. Look up Charles Dieringer on Google Scholar. And if you put NIU in quotes, you'll probably find my dissertation, which deals with the finances of township government and how the schools are dealing with that issue and making it accountable. That's available there. And that would probably be the easiest way to locate me.
Chuck, thanks for coming. Yes.
I have one other place. I'm a ham radio operator because in the service, based on my electronic skills, I became a radio operator, and that carried that on, so they could look up my call sign, which is N9DKJ, November 9 Delta Kilo John Juliet. That's another way to get a handle on me.
When this podcast comes out, you'll have to share it on your ham radio station.
Say that again.
When this podcast comes out, you'll have to share it on your ham radio station.
Well, that's interesting. Yes, my grandson, actually, that's a good idea. We don't really broadcast as such on ham radio. We're here for civil defense and emergencies, and involved in, like, if there's a disaster, schools or something, tornadoes come, we're involved in supporting the security issues. But we probably, I'll have to explore that option, because we really don't operate radio stations for broadcasting like that, because you need a ham radio license to communicate.
Thanks again for coming on the podcast, Chuck. Take care.
All right. Thanks for your time, George. It was enjoyable. Bye-bye.
Help George stay on the Chicago Heights City Council. Go and donate today at tinyurl.com/AldermanGeorge 2023. Need more George? Like his pages on Facebook. Friends of George Brassey PAC, Fifth Ward Business Alliance, Chicago Heights Bicycle and Pedestrian Resource Center, and the George Brassey Podcast.